bit of work on the Giza pyramid, and you've been working on showing everybody that it was originally meant to be a power plant. And I know that I got an email from you earlier. You sent me an article or a link to an article that you just put up June the 2nd, where some new study or new details had come out from the Queen's Chamber, if I understand it correctly. And what I gather from this is that there were some wiring diagrams found, some electrical pins, electrical conduit that definitely show that there was some form of electrical appliances of something of that nature in the pyramid. Am I understanding this correctly so far?
Yes, in my book, the Giza Power Plant, which was published in 1998, I had developed and presented a theory that the Great Pyramid was not a tomb, but it was actually more of a machine for generating energy, a power plant, if you will, and that it drew energy from the Earth and converted that to microwave energy, which then was exited the southern shaft in the King's Chamber. But a part of the function of the pyramid was the creation of hydrogen, which took place in a reaction chamber that is commonly known as the Queen's Chamber inside the Great Pyramid. And there are three chambers in the Great Pyramid. There's the subterranean chamber, there's a middle chamber, what Egyptologists have named the Queen's Chamber, though they consider that to be a misnomer because there were no queens buried with kings in pyramids in Egypt. And then the upper chamber, which is comprised of granite, was named the King's Chamber. The creation of hydrogen and depended on the delivery of two chemicals into the central chamber. And when this early explorers first entered this chamber in 1872, Wayman Dixon was one of them, and he detected a crack in the south wall, and he pushed a rod through this crack, and it disappeared. There was a space behind it. So he had one of his guys actually chisel out the limestone out of the wall, and they revealed a shaft that went horizontally and then shut off at an angle, about a 38-degree angle, but to where nobody knew. And because of the discontinuity of this shaft with the Queen's Chamber, in other words, it wasn't fully connected with the chamber, it couldn't be argued that it was used for ventilation or anything of that nature. Then what was it used for? Well, with the small hole or the small crack, in the context of a machine or a power plant, it would have served very well to deliver chemicals into this chamber, and then the chemical through the southern shaft would combine with the chemical delivered from the northern shaft, and it would boil off hydrogen. That chemical I proposed was a dilute hydrochloric acid solution. Well, that was before 1993 that I had developed this theory. Then in 1993, something very significant happened. There was an exploration of these shafts by a German robotic engineer called Rudolf Gantenbrink. And Rudolf Gantenbrink was contracted to actually do some cleaning of the shafts with a specially developed robot, and they were going to install fans to ventilate the pyramid and to draw off the moisture and draw out the heat of the inside of the Great Pyramid, because of the number of tourists that started to actually visit Egypt and go inside the Great Pyramid. It became a lot more humid, and now they have climate control in there. So, Rudolf Gantenbrink, though, proposed that he design another robot to explore the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber and to see where it ended, because while the exit points of the shafts in the King's Chamber could be seen on the outside, there was no exit points for the Queen's Chamber shaft. Nobody knew if they existed or where the shafts actually terminated.
I remember that.
Yeah, and so that was a very exciting expedition at that time. Well, when I was watching the video of the exploration, and the robot came to a stone block that was actually blocking the exit, and the shaft was about 210 feet long, and it ended above the level of the King's Chamber, and so then it was it kind of debunked the theory that the pharaoh had abandoned this chamber in order to build a higher one because he changed his mind. So it was, the theory about the pyramids being a tomb was weakened in my mind anyway because of this particular discovery. Not that I found it a very a powerful theory anyway, but this particular seemed to be another nail in the coffin of the tomb theory. So anyway, in 1993, the exploration by Gantenbrink and the discovery of this stone block enhanced the theory that I developed, because the stone block had two fittings that protruded through it, two metal fittings that were bent down. And the question was, well, what were the fittings for? Well, at that time, and there was speculation. They proposed that they were used to stop the block from being removed and from the shaft. And there was animations of the block lifting, and then the copper fittings actually preventing it from coming up. And
that doesn't sound likely to me, because copper bends easily.
Yes, it does. And the other part that seems to be a little weak in terms of the logic of that is, if you don't want a stone block to lift up, then don't lift it up. Or you know what? I missed that one myself. So anyway, but it did seem to be a weak theory. Or if it was to be lifted up and only lifted up a certain distance, then why, for what purpose? But the purpose that seemed clear to me was that the copper fittings, and a friend of mine was actually watching this documentary with me, and he said, well, they look like electrodes. And obviously, I had to agree with him, because they clearly did look like electrodes, and they also fit into my theory beautifully, because essentially this ties back to a conversation I had with a civil engineer years earlier, when I was asking him about doing percolation tests in the southern Indiana, where there's a lot of limestone bedrock. And how do you do a percolation test? Say if you've got bedrock under a very narrow layer of topsoil over bedrock, and he said, well, you do it the same way. He said limestone is porous, and the water or the waste will disappear eventually. It's just a matter of time.
Sort of like a sponge.
Right. Yeah. And I said, well, how do you determine the length of field tile that you would use? And he said, well, you'd drill a hole into the limestone, and then, the disbursement ratio would be dependent on the head pressure, and the head pressure is determined by the amount of water in a column. So the weight of the column would determine how much what length of time it would take to disperse. And of course I said, well, bingo, because I was referring back to the Queen's Chamber, and obviously if they needed to determine the flow rate into the Queen's Chamber, then they would need to maintain a column of the chemicals of a certain weight. And if it lowered, then so they had to have some means of knowing when that column of fluid had dropped. And those electrodes that protrude through that stone so-called door, or the stone plate, would serve as a switch. In other words, if you apply a charge to them and the fluid level drops, then that would break the switch. When the fluid, it would signal for the input of more chemical, then the fluid level would rise and cover the electrodes, and that would close the switch. So so that was, it seemed logical to me. It certainly fit within the context of the power plant theory that I had developed. But the question was, is there more evidence to prove that? Now, when you look at the pins from the front side, or the side that Gantenbrink was looking at, you would find that there was definitely the appearance of erosion on both of these pins, so both of these metal fittings, and they were tapered down, and that also confirms the rise and fall of a corrosive liquid, because the lower parts would be covered for a longer period of time than the upper parts, and they would show more erosion, so they appeared as a taper. But the question then was, the mystery was, well, what's behind this block? And we had to wait until 2002 to find out something about that block. And in 2002, in September 2002, they did a documentary. It involved Zahi Hawass and a team from the United States, iRobot, and they built another robot called Pyramid Explorer that they sent up the same shaft that Gantenbrink went up, and they sensed the thickness of the block using an ultrasonic thickness tester. That turned out to be about 3¼ inches, which actually is just a little thinner than the dimension that I had illustrated in my book, which relatively was about 3.6 inches. But certainly the design or the space behind it was of similar width or similar length than as I had illustrated in my book. The only thing that the robot was incapable of doing was actually looking behind itself, looking backwards. They did drill a hole through it, and then they poked an endoscopic camera through it and through a small hole, but the camera was only capable of a forward view, and the view that it picked up was another block. Everything. Yeah, it was another block, so it didn't cover everything. And the interesting thing though was that it did confirm the thickness of the block, and all that remained now was to actually have a camera that they would be able to look behind and see if there was a continuation of the electrodes, or what I determined to be electrodes. And I wrote a prediction on my website about what the exploration would find. And that has been up on my website since 2002. And the prediction was that they would find a continuation of the electrodes, that there would be cabling going somewhere, and they would probably find a supply shaft or a downward shaft that the chemical actually flowed up in order to fill the southern shaft. Well, the images that were revealed were not very clear, and the light was focused in the center of the block, and everything outside of that focus seemed to wash out and be in the shadows. And that's all the information that we had to work with. Except that there did appear to be a rectangular feature in the upper left corner, but it was not conclusive by any means.
So you're still trying to get more conclusive information, but yet you've gotten a lot more than what we had before.
Yes. I mean, even then, it seemed there were many different theories being discussed, except for my theory. But there were many theories being discussed by different people. Zahi Hawass, who was the chairman of the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt, he claimed that they would find a Khufu's diary, and there was a...
That doesn't surprise me.
Right, and there was another theory, I think it was Robert Bauval, who said that they would find a statue of Khufu, and he would be, gazing towards the star Osiris, or that's Sirius, and there was another theory from René Stadelmann, who was the German expedition in Egypt. He was an Egyptologist, and he was talking about the Khufu using the door to symbolically to move, go to the heavens or fly off to the heavens. So there was some, different ideas about what the purpose of the shafts were, and also the purpose of this door. But all of those theories or ideas seem to be debunked by the actual evidence that was revealed, all except the theory that I published in my book, and that while not conclusive, it didn't actually negate it. All we needed was a little more evidence. And lo and behold, just a couple of weeks ago, actually it was May 25th, an article was published on New Scientist magazine website, and it was a modern or 2011 exploration of the southern shaft and the use of a different kind of robot with a snaky, bendy camera that poked into the
to
hole.
Get a better view. They could adjust it.
Exactly, and was able to take a backward view and also take some more detailed photographs of the floor behind. Now, unfortunately, they in the article they mentioned the theory of the electrical power plant built by aliens, and it was not something that I have ever actually said that the Great Pyramid was built by aliens, but they kind of used that in the context of the alien kind of agenda, so to speak. But when you look at, and then they also said that the evidence seemed to discredit the idea that it was used for an electrical purpose. Well, I was looking at the photographs that they presented, and I was wondering, well, are they even looking at the same evidence that I am? Because they didn't mention the back of this stone block with the two fittings. The electrodes actually curl around and seem to be go back into the stone. I mean, if you look on my website and scroll down,
I got a link to that page, by the way. I'm just putting in the chat room.
Yeah,
I saw the pictures you put on it.
Yeah,
and you got a very nice diagram drawn that shows what you're describing right now for those that want to, go there and look. And let me tell everybody that it's www.gizapower.com, or is that gizapower.com?
Yeah, it's pronounced Giza. It's GIZAPOWER.
And click on Genton Brink. Well, I had it in front of me just a second ago, and I lost it. Genton Brink's door, new significant discovery. Now, I said it out loud for the people that listen on their smartphones or the telephone, and they can't see the link in the chat room. For the people in the chat room, I'm pasting the link directly to the article.
Okay.
And y'all can see his diagrams there. And it's some very interesting-looking diagrams, in my opinion, from when I was looking at them. But I don't really mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to get that out real quick while my mind was on it.
Oh, no problem. No problem at all. Figure 1 shows the photograph. It looks like they were taken from moving video, and they were screen grabs because there seems to be a lot of noise in the images. But what I noticed was not just the fittings, the back of the fittings, which were very interesting going back, but also at the top in the center, it appears to be some cables snaking out from the joint where the ceiling meets the top of the block. And I enhanced that image to show that more clearly, and that can be seen in Figure 2, where I have two red arrows going to identify that cabling. Not that you could miss it if you were looking real close. So that was something that was not noted in the New Scientist article, but was significant to me. Then, if you scroll down and you look at, say, Figure 4, on the floor, just near the bottom, it's in that lower patch, image patch that was pasted on there. There, to the left of the red line, there is what appears to be a piece of conduit, or the flexible conduit, such as the kind that we would even use today. And I have a sample of that on Figure 3. Is the flexible conduit is for industrial wiring applications. It's a helical, it's spiral, and it appears that, and when it's pulled apart, you can see on the bottom, this image in number 4 near the bottom, what appears to be a piece of that's kind of been pulled apart, and you show the wraps or the helix. It's kind of like the telephone cord. When you pull it apart, it kind of stretches out and
right.
Yeah. So
I used to make rings and bracelets out of them.
Yeah, right. So you have that. You see that, and then when you look at the other aspects of this particular photograph, you have the red line that goes down, and then there's 3 glyphs or symbols to the right of that red line, and the article. The Egyptologists that were interviewed didn't seem to know what those symbols meant. However, when I was looking at them, at first I was clueless too, but then it occurred to me that did these have anything to do with the way this assembly was wired? And indeed, if you look at the number 5, which it appears to be a number 5, it would actually work very well as a connector, and the connector, the lower loop, would be in contact with the pins, and these connectors would be pushed through the top and into the hole, seat into the hole, and then the electrode would be pushed through the pin, and then the wiring would be taken off from the top of that number 5. And this kind of lettering or numbering was not. The ancient Egyptians didn't use this kind of numbering. And then the middle symbol, which is like a stick figure with the head and the body and the legs without the arms.
Right.
I interpreted that to be the cable, and that what you have is like the inverted Y. What you have is the separation of 2 wires at the bottom of a braided wire coming down and then separated at the bottom. And then another of these symbols below that, below and to the right of that, it looks like some of the paint is worn off, but they're similar to the number 5 that appears above. So you have the central cable and a connector on each side of it, and then you have the red line, which symbolizes the cable coming out of the door and going to the power source. So if you scroll down, I put all this together, and the other part, if you go down to figure number 5, you will see that there's another sign of the electrical nature of these pins is what looks like insulation or at least sealant around this pin seeping out of the hole. You see that?
Right.
Yeah, but go down to figure number 6, and this is the wiring diagram of the fluid switch, where you have the central cable in the center, your positive and negative poles, and then wires going to connectors, and the shape of the connectors is a number 5.
Yeah, I was looking at that because I was wondering when I saw it. I know it says fluid switch, but I was wondering if part of this wiring couldn't run to a device that opened that stone door as well.
Well, it wouldn't need to. The stone door wouldn't need to be opened.
Okay.
On the corner is notched, and that notch could carry enough chemical to fill the shaft, because what you have at the lower end is a very small hole, so the flow rate is not going to be great. In fact, you can fill it through that small opening on the bottom right side when you at the block faster than what the flow rate into the chamber is. So the door would not need to be lifted.
Okay.
Now the other part about this is this was obviously this arrangement and design it was obviously designed so that the pins could be replaced. Which is really significant news for me, because when I saw the design of the pins, at first I was puzzled, but then after looking at it for a while, I thought, well, that makes perfect sense, because to have these as one assembly or one continuous piece. In other words, the wires on the back of the pins were continuous, and there was no connection to them. Then to make a repair would be a little more extensive and costly, but with just these short pins going through, you could bend the pin up on the other side of the stone block and then just pull it through the hole and replace it with new ones. So
they designed it that way in the hopes that it would be low maintenance.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily designed for low maintenance, but it's I'm sorry, it would be low maintenance. The effort involved and the cost involved would not be that great. But then when you look at the symbols on the floor in figure number 4, they left the wiring diagram as instructions, and I believe that they were placed where they are to identify the hot side of or the positive side as opposed to the negative side. So all the information is there, and then if you go to the other images, figure 7, you see the connectors installed in a hole, and then the rod pushed through it, and wiring going up to the shielded cable, the flexible hose, a conduit, and figure 8 shows the orientation of the shaft, and also how the flexible hose would go down through another hole or disappear somewhere. That's just that would be open to change. One of the things that we should note, though, which is really significant, is that there has to be access to those areas of the pyramid, which means that there has to be more passageways to be found inside the Great Pyramid. And those passageways would ultimately end up next to or behind this particular arrangement, this device, in order for maintenance to take place.
So they would have to actually get in behind that door in order to find them, though.
Exactly, and they would have to lift off the girdle blocks top block in order to perform the maintenance. And perhaps as a part of the maintenance, they removed some of that flexible hose, replaced it with new flexible hose. Some of it dropped onto the floor, and they just left it there. But all the evidence seemed to fit and seemed to support the theory that they were definitely electrical devices.
Sounds like it. Now, Marco in the chat room was asking if that connector was made out of copper, and I think he might have come in after you started describing everything. So I thought I would ask it for any other people that joined him a little bit after the show started about the connector being whether or not it was copper.
I am unaware of any tests or metallurgical tests that have been conducted on them. I don't know if they've retrieved any part of the copper. I know that a part of it broke up, but I'm not sure that the robot was capable of picking it up and bringing it back for analysis. But that certainly would be valuable information to have. The most logical metal to use would be copper, because it has to be bent bent down, and copper is soft, so it would work a lot easier than other metals, unless it was gold or silver or something like that. But copper is the most logical, because copper is a very effective conductor, and it's used in modern electrical appliances.
Plus, it's flexible.
Yeah, I'm building a replica of the model of this particular arrangement to demonstrate it, and I actually took delivery of copper rod to form those electrodes, and I should be getting that model put together in probably the next month or two.
Oh, I can see that.
Well, I'll be taking some video of it while it's under construction and assembly, and then when it's functioning. So I should have a YouTube video available.
Well, there goes my next question. Actually, I was going to ask you if you had some already, what you've done so far.
I'm sorry, somewhat?
Do you have any YouTube videos of what you got so far on this new information?
No, I have not. I haven't. Like I said, I'm building it out of plexiglass because I want visibility into the function of it, and so it's going to be built out of plexiglass. The piece, and it's going to be of the same dimensions as the shaft. It's 8 inches wide and 8.8 inches high. But the block itself that I bought was over $200. It's a 3-inch block, not a 3 1/4. But the 3-inch should serve as well as 3 1/4 inches. But a 3-inch piece of plexiglass was over $200. So, but when it's put together, you'll have visibility into the whole assembly. You'll be able to see the copper fittings, the electrodes, the connectors, the wiring. I've even got a piece of flexible conduit with wiring, so all of that will be visible. And then I've ordered a solenoid valve, an always open solenoid valve, so that when power is applied to it, it will close. But when it's opened, it will allow the chemical to flow into the shaft. So it we'll be demonstrating that on YouTube, and hopefully before the end of the summer.
Well, I don't want to miss that. I mean, once you get something like that built, it's kind of hard for people to try to dispute a working model.
Well, yes, and the interesting thing, though, Royce, is that there is another working model that a gentleman by the name of John Cadman built.
Oh.
And it was of another part of the power plant theory, but this was the subterranean chamber. And so as, this evidence is gathered and these designs are proven, we're actually changing history, because, the view of the ancient Egyptians and the technology that they were using seems to be a lot more advanced than what we've given them credit for. Now, John Cadman, he built a model of the subterranean chamber and demonstrated that it could serve as a hydraulic pulse generator. And he was emailing me. He was sending me several emails with his drawings attached and information on how this thing functioned. And eventually I said to myself, well, I'm just going to have to go out and witness this for myself. And so I flew out to Washington, Bellingham, Washington, to visit him. And we were out on his hillside. He lives on the side of a hill, and he had a catch pond and piping coming through. And this guy was like, you remember Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters, and he's building this mashed potato mountain in his living room. Well, you know, John was kind of like, he was inspired in pretty much the same way. He was telling me that he would wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he'd go out to his living room, and he'd be whittling out of plastic a model of the subterranean chamber. You know, he was obsessed with proving this theory. And eventually what he had surprised him and surprised a hydraulics engineer, Dr. Jack Cole, who was there at the same day I was to witness the operation. And when he had it functioning, the ground actually shook. It was incredible, but it was not just any disorganized or random thumping of the ground. The assembly or the device that he had built beat like a heart. So as I was walking down the length of this pipe and near this subterranean chamber that he beat, the ground was shaking, but it was going doo-dum, 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 and it was 60 cycles per minute.
That's a lot. So for me.
And so when you consider he had a very small model, but the size of the subterranean chamber is quite large. If you consider what the energy that would produce, it would shake the whole pyramid and could be heard for quite a distance. And that is basically the fundamental theory, and that is that the pyramid was actually used to resonate or harmonize the planet or the Earth's plates and draw energy from it. But as another function in the Great Pyramid, they drew off some of that energy and converted it to electricity.
Well, you know, in the chat room, this isn't a question. Kathy, she's one of the radio show hosts here at Blog Talk Radio. Thank you. I got tongue-tied. But, she was saying, and I wanted to share this because I think you're going to like this, so that would make more sense why the capstone was made out of gold instead of just ornamental. It actually had a purpose.
Yes, I mean, as far as the capstone, we don't know what material it was made out of. It could have been gold. There's still a lot of phenomena surrounding the Great Pyramid, and there are different ways that you can interpret the information. In other words, the production of the energy in the Giza power plant that I present shows the energy exiting the southern shaft. Now, what happens to it then? That's another question. Does it go directly out into space, or is it collected locally? I mean, these questions are unknown. The answers to these questions are unknown, but all we can do is speculate. The other speculation is that, it was broadcast just like Warden Cliff Tower that Nikola Tesla built to broadcast wireless electricity. And so, the technology that they were using, obviously they were doing things a little differently than we do, to generate energy. But if it seems to me that if there is a source of energy that would provide benefits to the civilization, particularly if it was energy that would draw energy out of the Earth's plates, energy that normally would build up and eventually cause a lot of damage due to an earthquake, because essentially what would happen is, with the plates being shaken like that, they over time you're creating what they call little mini earthquakes, but a lot of them. And essentially, the stresses in the plates are being relieved over time rather than being allowed to build up to a destructive level. So that's a very good observation regarding the capstone. We don't know what material it was made out of. Other capstones have been found. They've been made out of stone. There's a really nice basalt capstone in the Cairo Museum from one pyramid. But on the Great Pyramid, there is speculation that it was a golden capstone.
Well, I know I've seen pictures on the internet about of a what appeared to be a gigantic light bulb with a filament running through it, and it was quite obvious that for them to run that snake-like looking filament into the middle of that big bulb, that they had intended for it to be send the impression that it was a transparent glass, in other words, like a bulb would be.
That is the what is commonly known as the Dendera light bulb, and that has been interpreted by a lot of people as being an electrical device. It looks like one, and in fact, I think Eric von Daniken had a replica made by an electrical engineer, made a replica, and it would function very well. But it looks almost exactly like what they call a Crookes tube, and the Crookes tube was a device that Roentgen discovered X-rays with. So it's it's that particular image. And I've been to Dendera, and I've seen it on the wall in the crypt. There's more than one, and, it's fascinating.
Well, now, Kathy just asked if you feel with this new discovery, it's fair to say that's why other pyramids were built around the world. In other words, maybe some of the other pyramids were meant to be power plants as well?
That's a great question. And I wouldn't say that they were intended to, or built originally to be power plants, or to actually provide energy the way the Great Pyramid does. I do, though, think that they were used to harmonize the Earth's plates, and by doing so provided a tremendous benefit to society. If we were to build a pyramid, and with just the lower sections functioning without the upper details that are in the Great Pyramid, but with just the lower sections, and it was used to draw energy, seismic energy out of the Earth, that would have been of tremendous benefit to society. I think the Egyptians and also the Mayans were building pyramids probably for that purpose, to draw energy out of the plates. And the pyramids are all over the world. I mean, they've got them in China too. So there was something about the pyramid that was important to this ancient culture. But the Great Pyramid, the Egyptians just they took it a step higher. They went a little further with it, and the energy that was coming through that structure was being converted to electromagnetic energy.
Okay, now Kathy is asking, well, then since he feels that could be true, then does he feel that the crystal skulls could be connected to the pyramids as well?
that is a loaded question.
I actually never saw that one coming.
No, I can't really say that the crystal skulls are connected to the pyramids. I don't know how old the crystal skulls are, and I know that they have ancient crystal skulls they found in South America and Brazil and Peru. And I know that, you know, there's a lot of controversy on the age of the crystal skulls. So I'm not aware of any being found in any pyramid, though. Or is it, unless the Mitchell Hedges skull? I think that was a structure in South America, a pyramid, and allegedly found there. So, I mean, if they're contemporaneous, or you know, the provenance can be established to be associated with the pyramid, then the question becomes, you know, were they put there for a purpose related to the pyramids or not? I can't answer that question, really.
Now, I want to remind everybody that you can go to his website and get more information. And let me pull this up to make sure I don't misquote that and make a mistake here. And it's www.gizapower.com. And you click on that new article. It's right there on his front page about the Gantenbrink. And it's going to take you to a web page with the actual information that we've been discussing today. Gantenbrink's door, new significant discovery. And it took me a minute to get that page open because I have other pages open. I kept opening the wrong one. But at any rate, I also would like to let everybody know, if you go to UnitedParanormalInternational.ning.com and join up, membership is free. I have a group over there, Paranormal Palace Radio, and I've got the promo for this show posted there, and right there under the promo would be a good place for discussion. If y'all have any comments, any messages you want to send to Mr. Dunn, or he's also got an email address that you can email him at, and let me get that opened up in front of me. I didn't have it in front of me. Well, actually, Chris, you could give it to him real quick, probably quicker than I could.
Yes, if you're on my website, it's right at the bottom of the page, to the right, and it's cdunn1546@AOL.com. You might also want to view the video that on Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt, which is my latest book published last year, and it shows a study of the precision, the symmetry, and geometry of the Ramses statue. So that's a little YouTube video that people are enjoying. Since I put it up, it's had about 122,000 hits.
I would call that enjoying it, all right. But also, I wanted to mention, everybody, don't forget to come back and see me Tuesday. I'm going to have Norio Hawakawa on, and he's made some new discoveries about Dulce Base and whether or not what they're doing there. Dulce Top Secret, New Evidence with Norio Hawakawa, and that's this Tuesday, June the 7th at 8 p.m. I also want to thank you guys for coming and attending the show and participating as always. Couldn't have a show without you guys. It's getting close to the end, so I sure didn't want to forget that. You can find links to Chris's books on his website, at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, and I'm going to be putting links up on my website on the archived version, and as everybody already knows, my shows are always archived as well as live for those that couldn't make it at showtime for whatever the reason might be. Some people I know work during my show, or some people even asleep if they don't know what part of the world they're in or whatever. But, yeah, it's easy access. There'll be easy access to his books. The link to his site's going to be up, so it'll be easy for you to get all the information you like. And before we actually get out of here, I wanted to ask Chris, because we've got 8 minutes remaining, if there's anything that you'd like to cover that I didn't think to bring up.
Well, there is quite a lot to cover. If you go to the articles section of my website, there are several articles that actually give you some food for thought and some information, a little taste of what is in my new book, Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt, which was many years in the making, and I'm very proud of that book. Is essentially kind of negates or debunks entirely the Egyptologist theories on how the ancient Egyptians constructed their pyramids, cut stones, particularly very, very hard igneous rock like granite and basalt. And then there is an article that on the articles page called Advanced Machining in Ancient Egypt, and I'm preparing to update that after receiving new information. But that is an article based on one that was published in 1984 in Analog Science Fiction Science Fact magazine, and so that actually created quite a furor back then because it proposes technologies that the ancient Egyptians were supposed to have. And then below that, there are several articles pertaining to the Gantenbrink's door. There's an article on the precision of the ancient Egyptians, and also regarding the theory of the King's Chamber, the explosion hypothesis, in that in the Giza power plant I proposed that there was an explosion inside the Great Pyramid in the King's Chamber, which caused some of the changes in the King's Chamber. And so there's lots of good reading for those who are interested, and I think it's fairly light reading. I mean, it's written for the layperson, not too technical. And of course, the books are more thorough, obviously, and contain more information. And there's one particular area of research that the reader may enjoy, and that is the Petrie core. It's a granite core that Sir William Flinders Petrie found at Giza in the 1880s and brought back to England, and that has been a source of great controversy and discussion. And it's actually a piece of evidence that I use to dispel the notion of primitive methods of drilling. And so anyway, that's pretty much, I think, all I can cover right now in the time that we have. And I really enjoyed this conversation.
I have too.
I think it's very significant, this new information that was discovered behind Gantenbrink's so-called door is very significant.
I agree.
And I just hope that it gets the attention that it deserves.
Well, yes, if you lead it to its logical conclusion, and it does prove that your theories are, in fact, correct, then it proves that, in fact, they did have this technology, whether Zawi Hawass believes it or not.
Well, that's the bottom line is that if they have a better idea, then we need to hear it. But, the time to explain these phenomena with theories like it's religious symbolism, that is pseudoscience. It doesn't hold up. We need practical, good answers for the evidence, and religious ideology really doesn't really wash in this day and age.
Faith is fine in its place, but it's not good for factual evidence, in other words. But I would like to mention that, for people here that might think that, well, how could that have been a power plant? And, history shows that the Egyptians didn't have this kind of technology. I want people to stop and think, at least be open-minded enough to think that during the Dark Ages, it was called the Dark Ages for all the religious and historical and scientific records that had been destroyed during that time. And who's to say there wasn't a record of this in some of those books that had been destroyed at the time they were destroyed?
Absolutely. Most of our knowledge, is held in media that is vulnerable, and could it survive the millennia? If something happened to our society, what would Egyptologists or what would archaeologists 5,000 years, 10,000 years from now be able to interpret? If just a small section of our society was destroyed in a cataclysm, it would be like a domino effect. It'd be a house of cards, because everything is specialized. My company makes gas turbine engine parts. If the mills that make the materials that we use can't get chromium from South Africa, then the supply chain is broken, and we can't make our products. And it's that tenuous, really.
Well, Chris, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's fine. That's fine. That's a good place to stop.
I was just going to say that we got 1 minute before Blog Talk shuts the stream down, and before you got out of here, wanted to thank you for coming on my show and sharing with all my listeners here. And they're going to be listening for days to come. I know that. They usually do. The archives get listened to a lot. But I've enjoyed myself. You're a very knowledgeable man, and, well, I'd love to have you back on my show in the future.
That's fine. Yeah, we could set another date, and, based on the questions and comments that you may receive, we could schedule another time to address some of them.
In fact, while you're mentioning that, let me paste this address in the chat room for the people listening and that's here live so that they can see it. To go to UnitedParanormalInternational.ning, and they can sign up for a free membership there. And we'll have a discussion board over there that y'all can post your thoughts, your comments, and, y'all can also go to Chris's website and click on his email and, tell him what you thought of the show, tell him what you thought of everything he had to say. And, most of these authors I talk to on here, everybody wants feedback. It's very useful information. It gives them ideas of new areas to check on even.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I'd be delighted to hear from people.
So, Chris, I'm going to go ahead and call this here an end since it's coming up close to the time.
A small crack in the context of a machine or a power plant, it would have served very well to deliver chemicals into this chamber, and then the chemical through the southern shaft would combine with the chemical delivered from the northern shaft, and it would boil off hydrogen. That chemical I proposed was a dilute hydrochloric acid solution. Well, that was before 1993 that I had developed this theory. Then in 1993, something very significant happened. There was an exploration of these shafts by a German robotic engineer called Rudolf Gantenbrink. And Rudolf Gantenbrink was contracted to actually do some cleaning of the shafts with a specially developed robot. And they were going to install fans to ventilate the pyramid and to draw off the moisture and draw out the heat of the inside of the Great Pyramid, because of the number of tourists that started to actually visit Egypt and go inside the Great Pyramid. It became a lot more humid, and now they have climate control in there. So, Rudolf Gantenbrink, though, proposed that he design another robot to explore the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber and to see where it ended, because while the exit points of the shafts in the King's Chamber could be seen on the outside, there was no exit points for the Queen's Chamber shaft. Nobody knew if they existed or where the shafts actually terminated.
I remember that.
Yeah, and so that was a very exciting expedition at that time. Well, when I was watching the video of the exploration, and the robot came to a stone block that was actually blocking the exit. And the shaft was about 210 feet long, and it ended above the level of the king's chamber. And so then it was, it kind of debunked the theory that the pharaoh had abandoned this chamber in order to build a higher one because he changed his mind. So it was, the theory about the pyramids being a tomb was weakened, in my mind anyway, because of this particular discovery. Not that I found it a very a powerful theory anyway, but this particular seemed to be another nail in the coffin of the
bit of work on the Giza pyramid, and you've been working on showing everybody that it was originally meant to be a power plant. And I know that I got an email from you earlier. You sent me an article or a link to an article that you just put up June the 2nd, where some new study or new details had come out from the Queen's Chamber, if I understand it correctly. And what I gather from this is that there were some wiring diagrams found, some electrical pins, electrical conduit that definitely show that there was some form of electrical appliances of something of that nature in the pyramid. Am I understanding this correctly so far?
Yes, in my book, the Giza Power Plant, which was published in 1998, I had developed and presented a theory that the Great Pyramid was not a tomb, but it was actually more of a machine for generating energy, a power plant, if you will, and that it drew energy from the Earth and converted that to microwave energy, which then was exited the southern shaft in the king's chamber. But a part of the function of the pyramid was the creation of hydrogen, which took place in a reaction chamber that is commonly known as the Queen's Chamber inside the Great Pyramid. And there are three, the tomb theory. So anyway, in 1993, the exploration by Gantenbrink and the discovery of this stone block enhanced the theory that I developed, because the stone block had two fittings that protruded through it, two metal fittings that were bent down, and the question was, well, what were the fittings for? Well, at that time, and there was speculation. They proposed that they were used to stop the block from being removed and from the shaft. And, there was animations of the block lifting and then the copper fittings actually preventing it from coming up. And
that doesn't sound likely to me, because copper bends easily.
Yes, it does. And the other part that seems to be a little weak in terms of the logic of that is, if you don't want a stone block to lift up, then don't lift it up. Or
you know what? I missed that one myself.
So anyway, but it did seem to be a weak theory. Or if it was to be lifted up and only lifted up a certain distance, then why, for what purpose? But the purpose that seemed clear to me was that the copper fittings, and a friend of mine was actually watching this three chambers in the Great Pyramid. There's the subterranean chamber, there's a middle chamber, what Egyptologists have named the Queen's Chamber, though they consider that to be a misnomer, because there were no queens buried with kings in pyramids in Egypt. And then the upper chamber, which is comprised of granite, was named the King's Chamber. The creation of hydrogen and depended on the delivery of two chemicals into the central chamber. And when this early explorers first entered this chamber in 1872, Wayman Dixon was one of them, and he detected a crack in the south wall. and he pushed a rod through this crack, and it disappeared. There was a space behind it. So he had one of his guys actually chisel out the limestone out of the wall, and they revealed a shaft that went horizontally and then shut off at an angle, about a 38-degree angle, but to where nobody knew. And because of the discontinuity of this shaft with the Queen's chamber, in other words, it wasn't fully connected with the chamber, it couldn't be argued that it was used for ventilation or anything of that nature. Then what was it used for? Well, with the small hole of the